I have the privilege of introducing Brad Treat, whom I first met some years ago when he was right out of Cornell and working with a couple of professors, starting a small little company that worked on video conferencing, but very inexpensively as opposed to those $90,000 picture-tell systems and all that. Let's put it on a PC and do it from your desktop. And that little company was called SiteSpeed, and they sold last week for a mere $30 million, okay? And so there is an example of why Brad Treat, like Rick Richmond, is a budding serial entrepreneur. And he's now in his second business, which he's going to tell us about today. It's a company called Mesmerize, which is again an offshoot from Cornell University in their nanofabrication area. And not to steal any of his thunder, but the basic principle is a very tiny mirror that flips back and forth so that you can scan things, whether you're scanning to look at something or whether you're scanning to project an image, okay? It has both inputs and outputs for this technology, so it makes it a very fundamental, pioneering kind of device. So I look forward, Brad, to listening to this, and thanks very much for agreeing to come here and talk with us.
You're welcome. I do a lot of lecturing at Cornell. One of the things I was doing between SiteSpeed and Mesmerize was a job for residents at Cornell. So with that, I actually like really interactive sessions, so I encourage people to ask questions really along the way. And I think I'll start just maybe putting a little more color on the SiteSpeed story, because the theme here is intellectual property licensed out of the university. And I'm going to pick on a guy back here, Scott McFarland. He is a licensing agent we worked with for SiteSpeed and subsequently Mesmerize. But why it was important with SiteSpeed is we didn't have any money. And the university at the time had not done any no-cash deals. And so we really said, we're going to need this intellectual property patents to be able to start this company. We've got no cash. Let's figure out a mechanism. So to Scott's credit, he and his group over there allowed us to figure out a plan. We basically renegotiated the deal about 3 or 4 times along the way. But really the first deal was, okay, here, we called it an option, and there's different terms for it. We're going to let you go and do this for 6 months. And you can't even sell anything. We're not going to license it to the money. And if you do this, I think we're right. We'll give you 3 more months. And if you actually have 15 meetings with other capitalists, and if you do, it's basically you're going down the list, you actually raise some money, you go full time. That was one of the considerations because we were all students at the time. We kind of kept getting these next 3 months, and I really like that sort of structure. So as you guys are talking to whoever it may be that you want a license from, you say, okay, do a deal with us, and if we're doing the right things to grow the business, then keep giving us more leash to roll with. And it was the exact terms are not as important as the philosophy to have a licensing agent who understood business to say these are the things you should be doing for your business anyway. And that was really what got us off the ground. And the second question I get from people a lot of times is, how'd you find these guys? Right? Because I'm not the technologist. I have a technology background, but I didn't write a single line of code for software for SiteSpeed, and I'm not doing any MEMS mirror business for Mesmerize. I assure you, they don't let me touch the stuff because I tend to break it. So how do you find these technologists? And I found that a lot of times you can find these folks through sort of getting out of your normal circles and going to where the engineers hang out. And the engineers have all these great ideas, and if you just kind of poke them a little bit and get them talking, you almost can't stop them from talking. And so I would find, and I took advantage of working at Cornell University pretty extensively. There's a bar on campus, the Big Red Barn. That's where the engineers hang out, but they also hang out in the labs. I used to go into Rhodes Hall, and I remember one time I'm in the lobby of Rhodes Hall talking to this student, we're waiting for the elevator. I'm like, hey, what are you working on? He tells me he's an MN student. I'm like, and tell me specifically. And he just starts going with it. And he's telling me about this hatbox-sized satellite that they can fly around to the precision of 1 millimeter. You seen this thing, Scott? He's shaking his head. So these guys got this satellite, this little It literally looks like a hat box. And he goes, oh, let me show you. And he takes me over to his lab. And we start looking at this thing. He said, well, what we can do is we can shoot this thing up in space and go around and fix other satellites. So it can be this little drone, and if it has precision to a millimeter. And all it took was just just asking the guy, so what are you working on? And he was off to the races. And that's a single example. I mean, Cornell University has a $600 million annual research budget. If you take all the upstate New York universities, there's billions of dollars of research, which means billions of opportunities. And now it's saying, okay, what do we do now? Right? Who do you want to be how can you be that now what person? And that was essentially what I wanted to be. So part of what I want to talk about today is, okay, you find the idea, now what? So what are you gonna do now? And so even before we get to intellectual property, and I'm kind of working backwards here, the next thing I always try to figure out is there a big market for whatever this thing is? Right? Most of us can figure out that fixing satellites might be a good market. There's tons of them up there. And that seems like a good opportunity. I met a kid who had developed a very clever way to make ping pong balls last longer. That's not such a good market, right? That's a smaller opportunity. Clever technology. It's really neat. What's that? Well, yeah. Well, I got a razor blade lasts forever. you don't necessarily want that. But figuring out if something's worthwhile almost falls into two camps. So some stuff is obvious, such as the satellite thing. Some stuff is not as obvious. And I'll go back to the site speed example. Is that my co-founders is a 20-year-old undergrad named Aaron Rosenberg and his professor, Toby Berger, and Toby at the time was 68. And they were developing this, and they were telling me how cool it was that they could make a robot that could see by itself. And this was a Linux-based system, and the whole reason they wanted to be able to have this communication mechanism, they wanted to, even maybe if they needed to remotely control this robot. And I'm like, well, the remote control robot Linux business is not that big. But what else can we do with this? And that's where it becomes really interesting. And so they had kicked around video conferencing, but even then the business model didn't make sense. They initially wanted to just license this technology to Polycom and have Polycom sticking in all of their boxes and just mail Aaron and Toby checks. And that wasn't necessarily the direction Polycom or Picturetel wanted to go. So working with them and saying, okay, is there something cool here? Yes. Is it a big market? Is there a big potential? How can we take what it initially started as and turn it into something that is compelling? And I'll give you another example with Mesmerize. My co-founder, Cheyenne Desai, his original concept was how to make a wearable eyeglass that essentially painted the picture onto your retina. And I said, well, that's interesting, but I'm not sure how many people want lasers shooting into their eyes. And when we first started working on Mesmerize, we saw a lot of potential in making an ultra lightweight, high definition television. So we were going to go after something that would have a form factor between a rear projection TV and an LCD, but would be ultra lightweight. We'd call it the IKEA television. I mean, it literally could make a TV that would have the form factor of a picture frame. And that was actually the one we raised money on, that business model. And we changed, we sort of had in our back pocket this mobile projection thing, but we didn't think it was gonna take off. And what's happened with the LCD prices have just shot down the basement. DLP, you couldn't even buy one now, I don't think, a rear projection TV except off of eBay. And so we were able to move that into now focused on mobile devices. But once again, that's a long way from wearable displays that are shooting lasers into your eyes. So anyway, at the origin, so get out of the business school, go where the engineers are, figure out what their idea is, figure out maybe how it can be applied somewhere else, and then is there a big market opportunity there? And then really the next step is, what is the business model? And we struggle with this mightily at SiteSpeed. And you've seen different iterations of software. And we were doing this circa 2002, 2003. So the get a bunch of eyeballs and sell off the eyeballs model had sort of run its course and wasn't that fashionable. People are saying, well, let's go after business applications. You guys probably know WebEx, a company bought by Cisco. WebEx at the time was actually getting some traction around this remote presenting. We used that as our initial business model. And it's interesting how that model didn't actually work all that well for site speed. And we think it was because part of the WebEx software, if you guys use it, it's pretty expensive. Like 55 cents per participant per minute. And we figured out over time the reason they charge so much is because there's such a heavy customer support version of that. But that's okay. We kept playing with these different models, and we had a board of directors that was like, all right, we'll keep casting around. You know, folks say to me, well, how'd you guys figure out what the model for site speed was? And I'm like, well, we just tried a lot of things. And we just pushed them out there and threw a bunch of stuff at the wall and see what would stick. And that was certainly something you can do when you're dealing with software and website concepts. Anybody here working on a website concept? Nobody. Okay, I won't even talk about website concepts then. Anybody here actually actively working with a technology they're pulling out that they want to talk about? Nobody. So why are people here? Really, somebody give me a reason why you're here. I know some faces. They've already heard these stories. I might cold call. I do that. Please, someone.
I want you to spend research dollars.
Okay. We're good at spending money.
And number two is we're just setting up wireless projectors. Your idea of smaller, better, because bigger rooms. Interesting.
Okay, from a product standpoint. I wasn't, yeah. Well, yeah, and that is a challenge with Mesmerize. So the current product, I don't mind BlackBerry on me, but the current product idea is to make a tiny projector that'll embed into your iPhone or your BlackBerry. But it doesn't replace this thing. It's actually a personal projector, so that we're sitting at Starbucks and I can do a PowerPoint presentation and it's probably big enough and bright enough for 3 people. We're never going to achieve this sort of brightness because the battery will be gone in 15 seconds. Right? But it could be a situation essentially where you don't have a projector right now, or I can see people working with their laptops connected to BlackBerries. There's a trend now where people want to just leave their laptop at home. If you give them a bigger screen on their BlackBerry, then they'll be happy with it. The second use that the marketplace predicts, because these things don't exist, is entertainment, mobile entertainment, where you can, wherever you may be. I was on a plane recently and I watched a guy for 2.5 hours hold his PlayStation PSP, what do you call it? Yeah, it's about half the size of this thing. 2 hours he sat like this. Wow, like he's really willing to do that. This guy needs a projector where he could just drop his PlayStation or iPod or whatever it is on the seat back table and sit back and actually watch it without having, you know, I know if I go on a plane, I want to watch a movie on my laptop, it's a bit cumbersome. And you add into that the situation where people are traveling and maybe more of a hustle bustle. I don't want to open my laptop open on the New Jersey Transit. It's just not going to happen. But I could pop out my BlackBerry. So it's a whole new class, a device that doesn't exist. We're not the only ones doing this either. I mean, there's millions, hundreds of millions of investment already in the space for a product that doesn't currently exist. So that's a bit scary. And the analysts are all over the map because they don't, you know, there's no trend. It's not like I start with nothing. Where do I go from? There's no trend line on the map, and they try to. The best analysis has been trying to map to the way camera phones were adopted. Because camera phones started out as a companion plug-in product, and then the first embedded ones were really, really low quality. They weren't megapixels. They were like kilopixel or whatever that is. They were black and white, but people liked them as they got better and better and better adoption. So now when you buy a phone, it's more likely to find one with a camera phone than without, unless you're doing military stuff. All right, well, so that's a little bit about the product. What else does somebody want to hear today? Please tell me. I can just ramble for hours. Yeah.
So you basically have the science foundations, the science building blocks to proceed with this thing, or are you still working on those?
Right, and that's a good question. So there is a distinction, a line you got to draw when you work with universities, in that you don't want to be running a research project. And I think that's a key distinction. You'll meet, many times you'll meet engineers, in particular professors, who, for whatever reason, they've lost or run out of or don't have enough funding through their normal channels, and they say, start a business, or get a bunch of angels to invest in me, and then that'll pay for my research. And I couldn't caution you enough to not do that. In determining, so where our company is, and it's not terrible to say, well, we're done with the research. We're very much into development, like where they're throwing projectors at the floor to see how hard we can throw them and stuff like that. So we're messing around at that. You want to be doing that kind of stuff.
So you're doing applied technology development?
We're doing development, yeah. Yeah, so oftentimes I simplify between the R and the D.
Yeah.
Let the university do the R, the companies can do the D.
Right.
And that becomes a much more tangible schedule. We may fluctuate 6 weeks one way or another on the development schedule. When you're talking research, you could be 6 months, 18 months, either way. Because if your development plan says invent something here, right? That's the analogous to, and then a miracle happens, right? You certainly don't want to have that. But let me carry on to that point, because that's a good one, which is when you're picking your team and you're looking at university technologies, one person you don't necessarily want is the professor. And people find that kind of surprising to say. Professors work really hard to be professors. And according to Money Magazine, it's the second best job in the United States. So professors aren't going anywhere. Right? You want those professors on your technical advisory board, you want them as founders, you don't want them running the business, you certainly don't want to rely on them day to day. But what you find around professors, especially the good ones, are students and grad students. And that's who you want. So when you look around and you meet some brilliant professors, develop some great thing, start with that person. Great relationship to make. There's a guy down at Cornell, Harold Craighead. All his grad students are just getting picked off one by one to start companies because he's doing that kind of work in his group. But Craighead's still right there doing research. So when you figure out, okay, here's an interesting technology, here's where it can be applied, here's a market that's applicable to, now I got to build my team. Right? I'm going to make the assumption here that the folks here are not the technical inventor. So you're the business person, then you got to find that technical, I don't know, yin or yang or whatever the term is, to offset you. And in my case with SiteSpeed, it was a 20-year-old undergrad named Aaron with Mesmerize, as fortunately the founder of the inventor of the technology, Cheyenne. He was a Master's of Engineering student in material science, who very specifically was not going on to PhD land a professor. He was doing this research because he wanted to start his own business. And he's a bit of an anomaly, but what he wasn't trying to do was wear two hats. So when you kind of look at your team and say, hey, I got this great professor. There's this guy at Cornell, and I won't name his name. He's a professor. He keeps wanting to start the business. He's got this very neat technology. Could be a very neat business, but I don't think he'll ever go anywhere because he wants to be the CEO or another thing and be a professor. And you really can't do that. You got to be committed. So that's a long answer to a short question, but I appreciate the jump off point.
Yeah, this question, you said the professor was the second best occupation. Was the first?
According to Money Magazine, it's computer programmer.
Okay.
I don't know, pay per hours. I don't know how they figure these things out. But I think professor's a good one, sir.
How do you then, because of all the money that's available for doing research like an SBI or and so forth, how do you make the decision when to go for that funding and expand your technology and then or focus on the commercial application for the technology?
Well, I've never gotten the answer. Do you want to take that one, Andy? Andy's good. You got to know Andy's scary. He's a...
commercial viability of the technology. We comment on that. We, in the medical device coding business, we used SBIR money. We got several grants, but we did it as later stage financing, where we were developing or modifying our coding for specific applications for medical device companies. And that business would be up and down like this. So we got SBIRs to work on new things, and we filled in the dips with the SBIR activity. So when we had commercial activity, that was at first priority. But then when we had a little bit of a slowdown there, then we worked on the SBIR and use that to develop new product concepts.
There you go. I've never been very successful at getting that kind of stuff. The one thing I do like about the venture money is that they kind of give you free reign, but it's expensive money. And so you don't get any harnesses, but it's expensive. The joke I make is the only difference between venture capital and loan sharks is venture capitalists won't break your legs, but it's basically the same exact term. Now that being said, your best VCs are the ones who are entrepreneurs themselves historically, and I had the good fortune with SiteSpeed, and I think now with Mesmerize of having entrepreneurially minded venture capitalists who they want to jump in there with you. I mean, one of them literally spends half his time in my office, and he's like soldering things. I think, I don't know, but yeah. So the SBIR question is probably, wish I could answer it better. I should be getting more of this free money. Maybe we'll talk to these guys over here about spending it.
Brad, you want to talk a little bit about coming to that agreement with the inventor, the scientific partner, the economic formation?
Yeah.
Some of the issues there.
That's thanks, Andy. So one of the downsides about when you meet these young engineers or experienced engineers who have these great ideas, they first think that you're there to steal it. That you're there to take their idea, run off with it, and as soon as you show up in a tie on, as soon as Rich shows up with a tie on, it's like, oh, that's bad news. He's a suit. Yeah, he's a suit. Well, I want no part of that. And they naturally distrust people, and I think building that trust is absolutely critical. When I did it with the guys from SiteSpeed, my philosophy was, you guys have already proven your value because you've already developed this technology. I'm going to prove my value. And so I literally started working with them on a handshake. Like, hey, listen, we'll figure this out. If it turns into something, we'll get formal, but for now, it was a two-way non-commitment. They weren't going to give me anything, but I wasn't going to promise them anything. I said, I'll do some market research. I'll make some phone calls. I'll travel to some trade shows, whatever it is. I'm going to figure this out and show that I'm adding value before we get into this. And probably the biggest tangible piece of value actually came with working out this initial license with the university. I did all of that work with no agreement in place. And I think when it's all said and done, that turned out to be a better situation for me because I say, hey, listen, I'm demonstrating that I'm adding equal value. Going forward, I want to be incentivized for equal value. And when we officially formed the company in the summer of 2001, we just literally broke up the company 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. So myself, the professor, and the student. Because when it's all said and done, this is a multi-inning game. Right? It's rare that entrepreneurs go buy islands on their first time out. So though I didn't sell it actually. The guy I hired to run the company sold it for $30 million. I assure you, they didn't receive a $30 million check. There's a whole lot of investors and a whole lot of people. And quite frankly, most importantly, my co-founder, Aaron Rosenberg, we did make him a millionaire. And that becomes a very compelling story when I go and do my next thing. Say, hey, the last guy, I met him when he was 20. Here's his ski house, right? That's an interesting story where engineers now want to work with you. Every single one of my investors made money. My early investors made 13 times their money into the deal. And so I can say to people now, okay, probably want to get in early. Could be a good return. It's a multi-inning game, but back to your point, Andy, is building that trust early on is so hard. And I wasn't the first guy that the SiteSpeed founder, the tech guys had worked with. They had probably worked with like 15 other people. And every single one of those folks wanted some sort of, I want 5% of the company non-dilutive for the first 2 years, or I'm not even going to return your emails. And I'm like, I don't trust you, right? You're a suit. You're just playing to exactly what they think the bad suits do. And so building that trust, I think, is crucial. Then once with Mesmerize, we did it slightly differently. I had a little bit of track record and reputation, and that helped. But when we struck the first deal, I was still working for the university. And I said, here's the deal I want, but I'm going to vest into it. So I didn't have all the ownership on day one. And we put together this overly complex spreadsheet on how I was vesting into ownership. And same thing, I said to my co-founder, I'm gonna earn this. I'm gonna earn into the ownership. You don't have to give it to me from day one. And what happened is after 9 months, when we actually raised the venture money, we rolled that up and kind of pushed that agreement aside that we had a simple ownership structure. But once again, I felt like it was important to show the value first because they already have, and they don't trust you. So you come over for beers, that's good. That's how you meet them. They're still going to distrust you. But that's a good point.
How many rounds of VC money did you do?
Well, with SiteSpeed, I raised $4.5 million as a CEO. So I was a CEO for 5 years. My successor, he ran it for just shy of 3 years. He raised another $7 million. And we did it in all kinds of weird round structures. So, Rich, I can't actually say. One thing we were trying to do is without getting too much inner workings, SiteSpeed is almost sold about 5 different times. And so we kept being on the brink of selling the company to pick your candidate. You could look around the landscape, and every single one of them at some point we were dating, right? And never made it to the altar until Logitech. So, but the reason that ties to the funding is each time we needed money, we're also in a position to potentially sell the company. So we're like, well, we're gonna. Oh, we didn't do it. We had to go kind of raise mezzanine and carry and debt. And we sold a lot of stock.
Because the problem with going through too many rounds is you become so diluted at the end that you, first of all, lose control of the company
Yeah.
and what direction it's taking. And VCs will actually come in and take your management out with their management in. It's so cool.
Right. We never went through
So you didn't get that far.
There was, my departure from the company was largely my doing. And I said, I was running this thing 24/7. And I was burned out. I wasn't the nice, friendly guy I am now. My health had gotten bad. I was not nice to be. I was like, and the original plan was I was just going to maybe take a year off. And look, we've been recruiting this guy. We'd already been recruiting a new CEO for 9 months. And, by the time it got to the point where I was just, I also think it makes sense that I wasn't there. Right? You bring in a new guy to be CEO. The old CEO can't be sitting there going, hey, I hired all these people. Right? I can't be like, hey, Brad never did it that way. Right? You can't do that. And we'd grown the team with a pretty loyal group. It's one of the things I'm most proud of is the entire time I ran the company, we only had one resignation. We fired some people. We only had one resignation. So people, and we were paying everybody below market, typically anywhere from 10% to 50% below market. Now we've compensated with equity, but there were no golden handcuffs at SiteSpeed. We worked it pretty hard.
So did you ever consider getting a strategic partner to invest as opposed to a VC, someone that could bring in something that you didn't have out of distribution or whatever?
Yeah, so one of the bigger deals we did was with Creative Labs. Do you guys know Creative Labs? So they used to be, they used to be the #1 webcam seller in the world. They sold over 50% of the world's webcams. Logitech is #1 in the US, but circa 2004, 2005, Creative Labs was #1. And so we did a deal with Creative Labs, to your point, Rich, which was a relatively complex deal. It involved a distribution deal. And there were some kickers in it where they were going to get equity depending on how many boxes shipped with our software in it. And that actually turned out to be a great deal because they initially were just going to, SiteSpeed's kind of positioned itself in the marketplace as a premium, almost a corporate quality video experience. So it's not this herky-jerky thing that you may see on Yahoo. It's specifically designed to dissuade people from using it for adult content, which is a lot of historically what webcams were used for. So it's kind of geared towards a high-end, high-quality, not voyeuristic environment, which makes us good as a partner. And so Creative initially was just going to put our software in their premium high-end cameras. They're $75 and up. And when we were trying to figure out a provision to get into the other ones, this is what we came up with, this volume kicker. And so when the CEO of Creative saw that, he's like, you know what? We should not only put these guys in every single webcam, we should put them in other stuff. And so they actually tested shipping site speed with non-webcam type products, you know, that disc that you get with your MP3 player or whatever it may be. We found that the take rate on that wasn't so high and it confused people, but I certainly like the philosophy of, like, at the very least we were in every single Creative webcam. And considering they represent 50% of the world's volume, that was a good place to be. And you know, other people noticed that. And that helps, you know, then it starts rolling. So we gave up some equity to Creative, or warrants or something like that. That was a complex structure. And that's almost like a strategic investor. So they weren't putting money in, but they were certainly helping us with distribution. But more importantly, when everybody else saw that, they started taking it seriously. That's how we were able to get the deal done with Intel, and the deal done with Taiwan, and the deal done with Dell Computers. And you know, you still had to go through the machinations with all those guys. But having Creative Labs sort of the door shoe was big for us. And that was a strategic, almost a strategic investment. We used equity to get a bigger distribution deal by putting together the right incentives. You guys are going to have to leave me with questions. Yeah.
How about the early days of Mesmerize? You got the vendor on board, you got your software leadership, you got the technology license. Now you sit there and realize, you know, I don't have one. Tell me what your life was like. How that.
Well, I guess we were in a slightly different position because we raised money pretty quickly. But maybe I'll talk about the process of how we raise money. I'm working with a group here out of Syracuse now who's kind of in the same position where they're trying to raise money, trying to figure out how to do it. And ultimately, you got to figure out a way for the deal to come off the table. Right? The deal's got to come off the table. And because your business is going out of business is not the type of off the table that people are looking for. So then you say, well, how do I make the deal go away? How do I get that first fish to nibble? With SiteSpeed, we were able to do it by using angels. And angels tend to be less sophisticated. They don't communicate with each other. And that allows you to almost play them off each other. So we had one angel who kind of came in because we told him that, here's our term sheet. And he said, okay, now I have a term sheet. So then we were able to say, well, one of our angels has given us a term sheet. Then we use that to lever up to better deals. But with Mesmerize, effectively the way we did it, and I apologize for any state people here, is we played states against each other. And the state of Maryland has a very progressive venture group. They actually call it the Maryland Venture Fund. And they run it as a venture fund, even though it's a state business development group. And there was a time when, in our history, that SiteSpeed was actually based right outside of Baltimore at the University of Maryland incubator. And then the woman who runs that is a Johnson School alum named Ellen Hammerly. And so we had a relationship with them, and so we reached out to them and said, hey, we got this new business. Give us an incentive to come to Maryland. My sister lives down there. I got friends down there. It would not have broken my heart to move down to Baltimore again. And so they were actually the first ones to come in with a deal and said, okay, here you go. We're gonna give you, if you move this business down here, here's some money. And if you do this, this, and this, here's a bunch more money. And that was really kind of the starting point to make the deal go away. Right? Because many of the upstate New York investors, anybody in here an upstate New York investor? No, good. Many of the upstate New York investors get their money from large institutions in the state, like universities, endowments, and in their bylaws it's often written that they have to invest in the state. They can follow out of state, but they rarely do. So they have to invest in state. So what that means is that they see a deal now going away. So in that case, location mattered to them because they couldn't invest. And one of the things that's also happened with some upstate New York investors is they didn't bite early on some companies, and they were blocked out of follow-on rounds. And I won't name any names, but there's been some companies who the local investors had a crack out. They said, oh, I'm not quite ready, I'm going to wait. And then when the Boston, San Francisco money came in, they couldn't get in the deal. They were just sort of like blocked out. And this is sort of a more recent trend. But figuring out a way to get the deal off the table. Now this company out of Syracuse, the way I think they're going to get the deal to come off the table is they have actual revenues, right? And so they're going to have figure out how you can run your business to match your revenues, and that'll help the deal come off the table. Instead of I'm going out of business, it's, hey, listen, I got real customers. Let's see if we sold them this software package or whatever it may be. Let's see if we can maybe pile on some more services or the 2.0 version of software, whatever the heck it may be. Because they actually have some great marquee customers. They're just not charging them all that much money. And that's a way to get the deal off the table. But that's, at the very basic level, the way to get venture capital and invest is figure out how the deal's going away. Or whatever strategy it is. You just can't be, I'm going out of business. And I would meet that a lot when I was doing entrepreneur residence. I need this money, we're going to go out of business. And the VCs go, maybe I can pick it up in liquidation then. That's
Clearance.
clear and settle. Or, hey, if it's such a great business, or if it's you run it so bad that you can't keep it in business, they don't necessarily want a piece of it. That's the fundamental challenge: is how do I make the deal go off the table?
During all this time, you had technological people that were growing on the side. I was also human side.
I think the way you do that, I think there's two ways. One, you make sure you're working as hard as they are. Right? I wasn't out there playing golf being like, you guys keep coding. Right? So you're working as hard as they are. But probably more importantly is you're really open and honest with them about everything. And this is just a good way to run a business. Because I found, I have a friend of mine who runs a company, and he holds a little more information close to the chest, and I think it's prudent. And what happens is whatever your employees are dreaming up in their mind is going on is always way worse than what the real bad news is. So if you just tell them, here's the bad news, we don't have any money. Right? When we were running SiteSpeed in the early days, we knew to the day, like Wednesday, we're out of money. Like we could tell you my fume day to the second. And then you get real damn creative on how you're going to stretch that dollar way, way out. And there's a lot of folks who are going to try to help you stretch your dollars out. And we were in a University of Maryland incubator. They gave us all kinds of free stuff. And we're in a facility here in Ithaca called Langmuir Labs. If you guys are looking for space, that's a great place to be. It's run by a management company, even though it's owned by Cornell. And this management company runs it with the thinking, all right, let's get these businesses in here. Why do I need to hit them up for $1,500 rent when they don't have that kind of money? But if I get them in here, treat them well, give them a bunch, none of our furniture matches. Like every single piece of furniture in my office is different. They're not even the same. You got desks of the wrong height, you got blocks of wood under them. It's a disaster. But hey, we're not wasting any money on furniture. I can assure you that. So there's people out there who will help you. And especially if they have a vacant office, it's the old Priceline theory. That's inventory that expires at the end of each day. So why not have you in there working on it? If they've got a bunch of leftover furniture that they'll let you have at it. And eventually you're going to get hopefully to a point where you can start paying rent and you can start growing. You can turn into something more interesting. And so to your point about the early days, how do we keep them motivated? Be honest with them, let them know what's going on, work hard, and really look for ways that you can not spend money. Right? We're the kings of Priceline too. You get Priceline. I'll tell you quick my Priceline trick. It's very simple. Go to Hotwire, see what Hotwire's charging you, and then bid 20 to 25% over Priceline. You'll get it every time. So wherever you're going, that's always been my trick. And then same with rental cars. I think you actually get a better deal when you bid up. Don't necessarily bid for the economy car, bid one or two up, and they'll end up bumping you up to an SUV. Just ask them. Because the game with rental car companies is they don't carry economy cars on their lot. Because you can't ever bump anybody down, but you can always bump people up. Right? So they always have one notch higher. And the whole price on the website is just price discrimination. I would be surprised if you went over to Syracuse, Hertz, if they even had an economy car on the lot. They've got them on their website, but they probably don't have them on the lot. So it doesn't make sense. But anyway, I digress. There's lots of ways you can save money. And we would drive a lot versus flying. Andy.
Matt, you went through the site speed experience, which I'm sure was a learning experience in terms of your entrepreneurial thing. How did that help you in terms of grounding your technical partner, setting restaurants and setting up the expectations there for, okay, this is what our lives are going to be like?
Yeah. Well, that's one of the nice things about starting businesses based on university technologies, is if you have a student or grad student, they're already used to living cheap. Right? These are not, right, so I'm not one for material items either, so it's, I mean, I'm not materialistic, that's what I meant, not the other way you can interpret that. So it really wasn't actually that hard to set the expectation of lifestyle because they're already living like students. I'm like, well, just live like a student. They're already doing it. They were actually really good at it. So with SiteSpeed, I mean, our first server, our first website, and the first service was being run out of a dorm room. And it was such a really great internet connection, we didn't want to move it. Like, oh, we'll just piggyback this high quality university internet connection and run with that. And so it actually didn't take much convincing. I just said, just keep living like a student a little bit longer. Another way, a friend of mine, and he knows him, named Sean, he did it, is he was married, and his wife is a nurse, and they together said, you know, we're in this together. So his recent company, he bought a new house, quit his job, and found out his wife was pregnant with their second child all in the same week. And so he also started his new company. And so they figured out that, all right, we're going to have to live off of her income because he's not going to have any for a while. And in the long run, that's worked out famously for him. But that's another tactic. So they said, okay, we're going to be a one-income household. It's just going to be the different spouse now. Because he was starting his business, he was able to at least have the flexibility to do many of the things that his wife, who's previously a largely stay-at-home mother, had been doing. They just kind of switched roles. She went back to work, and he started his business, and he worked all day on that, and they slugged through it. So live like a student or be married. I haven't had any success with the latter, so that's a good question. So I'm trying to think of some other topics around, what else do people come here hoping to find out?
You know, actually, I was just curious. I didn't hear it in the beginning of your talk. What were you doing at the university?
Okay, so yeah, a little more about my bio. That's a good question. If I go back, I did my undergrad at North Carolina State, and I was a mechanical engineer. I spent 8 years in the auto industry, which that doesn't make any sense. When I started SiteSpeed, I was in MBA school. And I went to MBA school specifically to learn about how to start businesses with other people's ideas and other people's money. That was specifically what I went there to learn how to do. So I used to make car parts. So I could tell you about running a business, but I didn't know how to finance or market or any of that kind of stuff. And so I focused my training not on entrepreneurship, surprisingly, but on finance. So I took many of the same classes that the Wall Street guys were taking. So they have this, Cornell has this program in their MBA school they call it immersion learning. And one of them is immersion in investment banking. And they do have an immersion in entrepreneurship, but I didn't take it. I took the immersion in investment banking because going to the point about other people's money, well, Wall Street is, the mechanisms for raising money for some large company, it's the same mechanism as raising for a small company, it's just fewer zeros. And so that's the mechanism that I specifically wanted to learn.
So you were actually an MBA student?
Yes, I was. And I think that's actually, any MBA students here? I know we got one. Just one MBA student. I think while you're at school is actually a great time to start a business.
Well, you were actually doing the job while you're on the job training.
Exactly. Like all my classwork was things I was doing to grow the business. So I did take an entrepreneurship class, and so the business plan I wrote for that class was the SiteSpeed business plan. And when the professor asked for a volunteer to present the class, it was, oh, I'll do it. You get the real feedback, yeah. And we did business plan competitions. We did these reverse business plan competitions I won't bore you with, but there's all this sort of mechanism around starting businesses within graduate business schools. So specifically going there to start a business with somebody else's money, somebody else's idea. And this maybe is a good segue into why I did it in the first place. Because I was actually a pretty good engineer, and then I had moved up through management, was running this small facility that made windshield washer nozzles. So I worked for a company that made 80% of the world's windshield washer nozzles. We shipped 1 million nozzles a week. We had I was responsible for a manufacturing floor. There was 125 people on a 24/7 shift schedule. And anyway, but a little further back in my career when I was an engineer, I was responsible for this factory within a factory. It's a pretty common concept. This previous company made drive shafts, and I was responsible for small lot size drive shafts. So we made them for the Hummer, we made them for ATVs, we made them for snowmobiles and things like that. So small run, lots of variety. And this particular factory within a factory, when I took it over, was really the stinker for the facility. It was losing $2.5 million a year. It was on a 6.5 to 7 day schedule every week. I mean, overtime was the norm, not the exception. And they said, "Here you go, Brad, you can have this one." So anyway, we did. I had a great bunch of people I was working with, so I can't claim total credit. But in that year of taking it over, we were able to get it on a 4.5 day work schedule, turn it into one of the highest performing from a scrap and on-time delivery standpoint in the facility, and effectively cut $2.5 million of cost out of the factory in the factory. So I go in for my year-end review, my annual review, and I'm like, "Hey, we had a pretty good year." My boss is like, "Yeah, hey, you guys had a really good year. I mean, look, I have documented cost savings of $2.5 million." And my boss says, "Yeah, you had documented cost savings, $2.5 million. I'm going to give you the maximum raise." Here it comes. Here comes the maximum raise. And I'm saying, he goes, 15%. And I'm like, "Really?" He's like, "That's right, 15%. It's the biggest raise he'd ever given, 15%. And I said, yeah, and at the time, just for easy math, I was making roughly $40,000 a year in rural North Carolina. And I'm like, "So I just saved you $2.5 million, and you're going to give me $6,000 spread over a year's time." It's like, "You should triple my salary and give me a Mustang and a week off." He's like, "Well, I gave 15%. And so my perception of opportunity costs at that point changed, because the opportunity cost of not having that job making drive shafts wasn't the $40,000 or now $46,000 or the next, maybe I get up to $49,500. It wasn't that. That wasn't the opportunity cost. It was the $2.498 million that I didn't get. And so when I specifically wanted to go into entrepreneurship, my first goal was, I'd go to Barnes & Noble and get these entrepreneurship books, and they have all kinds of great advice on how to open a Dairy Queen or a dry cleaner. And I said, well, you got to have money to do those kind of businesses. You got to have it. I didn't have any money. And I remember reading one of these books that said, there is a way to start a business without your own money, but you probably need an MBA to go do that. And I'm not completely convinced that you do need that, but you do need to be able to sell your idea to financiers. Because there's a lot of people out there who like to invest in these type of businesses, and they're not all businesses that are going to be great for that. So that was sort of my motivation. I wanted to play for the upside. So I wasn't worried about the paychecks I wasn't getting, because I considered that, I knew what my opportunity cost was there. It was a capped opportunity cost. But there's these $2.5 million opportunities out there that I wasn't getting. And that was my motivation for wanting to do it in the first place.
You say, though, that you're not materialistic, but it wasn't materialism. It's more like what I'm worth. Once you proved what you were worth to yourself through this company, then you saw how shortchanged you were. I guess that's what it was.
Yeah, it's like, exactly. That's a good way to look at it. I wanted to be valued at what I was bringing to the table, not at what my next best alternative was. So anybody has a salary, they're basically priced at what their next best alternative is, not what their true worth is. And that's where if you own the business, you're actually growing the value of that. And I apologize for everybody who has a salary. I'm sorry. I've got one now. So. But you got to pay your bills. I mean, that's the reality of it. You got to figure out, okay, here's what I need to live. And that's how we compensate ourselves. And Mesmerize, that's how we compensate people at SiteSpeed. That's when we're looking for people. We say, okay, I don't want you to miss your mortgage and have your wife leave you, but I want to give you a piece of the upside. Let's figure out what that balance is. And people kind of fall into two groups. There's some who are just gung-ho for it. I got one guy, I pay him $10 an hour, and I pay him everything else in equity. Right? He's a 20-year experienced guy. But he has his situation, he can do that. Okay, and we got another guy who was like, I don't know, I just don't get it. I don't understand what this whole equity thing is about. And I think I'm paying him 5% equity, and we actually he was a consultant contractor, and we literally just cut him free today. Because we said, hey, if you're not playing for the upside, we want people playing for the upside like the $10 an hour guy. And so we cut him loose and said, maybe you should go find something more stable. Not stable, but traditional. But you are looking for a certain type of person. And I think it does take a fair amount of just honesty. And we brought a guy on board, and I said, here, listen, talk to all these people. Do your references on us. We're not here to hose you. Like, I can't guarantee anybody that we're going to have another $30 million sale or $300 million sale. We could be bankrupt tomorrow. I hope not. But, I want us all playing for the same end game. Right. So I saw she opened the doors. How much time do we have? Time? I don't. I saw you open the doors. I didn't know if you were. That was a signal, like a subtle code, like.
It was only so noisy that I wanted to
Oh. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know that. Hello. Yeah, I mean, so to your point, Rich, I mean, I have heard of people literally posting salaries up on the coffee room board. I'm not actually a big advocate of that because the pay scale I'm endorsing is I want to pay you what you need and compensate you the rest in equity. And different people have different needs. But because what I think happens with this, posting that kind of those sort of numbers, you get into sort of a weird matching game. I think it's actually a negative. So this is the one area that, though I favor being open about almost everything, I find that can be kind of a race to the bottom when you start posting salaries or posting compensation levels. That can be tough.
But is everybody equally motivated to be successful? I mean, they're all relatively motivated because a certain high percentage of their compensation is in the future, right? And they're willing to work for that.
Yeah, and I think when they start thinking about when the future compensation is so ambiguous, it becomes this great equalizer. Because it's this, when I look at your salary and I'm paying you $60,000 a year, right, that's very cut and dry. But nobody knows what this X% of equity is worth because everybody has different vesting start dates. People have different vesting schedules. Well, not have the same vesting schedule, but different vesting start dates and different grants. And oftentimes there's follow-on grants and things like that. And it gets really kind of confusing. So I don't advocate, but that's just my style. Now, if people ask me, I usually will tell them point blank my situation. But I leave that as a sort of an individual choice versus kind of blasting out to the whole company. You know, here's your situation at home. You've got to bring home $55K for whatever reason. And this guy over here is making $35K.
Do you ever have anybody come back and say, okay, in lieu of a raise, I want more equity?
Oh, yeah.
In other words, they're willing to take more of a chance in the future than they were last year.
Yeah, I love that guy. Yeah, that's...
He sees the worth and he's willing to give up now for later.
Right.
And so you know he's really tied into making the whole thing successful.
Exactly. And then, I go back to the guy I paid $10 an hour. This is somebody I've known for literally 10 years. And so I find that sort of the people who are in this the longest are the ones who actually appreciate the equity as much as anybody. It's the folks who this is all kind of foreign to them. And this does tend to be a challenge in upstate New York, in that a lot of these concepts are foreign to folks here. There's a perception of even failure that I think is hurting. So I have this, I don't know if you want to call it a tale or a comparison, I call it the 49er effect, which the reason San Francisco Bay Area, I think, has a different perception of startups is they don't refer to startups that fail. In the same way that gold miners view digging for gold. So you got two gold miners digging. For a while, they just both have a pile of dirt. One of them finds a vein. The other guy doesn't find a vein. If he didn't find that vein because he wasn't working, that's a failure. But if he didn't find that vein just because of whatever circumstances, he didn't find that vein, but he kept digging, it's like, we're going to shut that down, come over here to my vein. Right? So this is not a failure. It's they got all kinds of terms for it, but never it's a failure. It's mothballed, it's on hold, I'm going to come back to that. It's it's on the shelf, it's incubating. All these kind of terminologies where there's definitely this perception of success and failure, this black and white that you find.
Refocus it, basically.
Yeah.
Everybody, you don't put everybody in a horse race and say, okay, you only do one winner. What you're saying is, we want to look at 4 different ways of doing this. We don't know which one's going to be best yet.
Yeah.
And once we determine which one it is, the other 3 are going to come home for help. And I don't care which team you're on, you're going to be just as successful.
As long as you're digging hard, yes.
As long as you do. Okay.
As long as you're digging. So, the companies that I think fail are the ones who aren't digging. Right, so if somebody has to mothball or put something on the shelf because something else came up, or they, all their pickaxes are dull, I'm okay with that. I don't consider that a failure. And you can learn a lot of lessons. People are surprised when they hear venture capitalists say, "Oh, I'll invest in a guy who his first business didn't make any money and went out of business," because there's a whole lot of digging he learned. He learned how to swing a hammer and he learned how to sharpen a blade, and that kind of lesson is just as valuable as the guy who, quite frankly, stumbled into his vein of gold. And I definitely want to dissuade people from thinking that way. So you hear about businesses, and it's like, hey, my next bit, I actually started a business between Mesmerize and SiteSpeed, and we actually made a little bit of money. We did shut the thing down, and I don't consider it a failure. It's like we're just gonna mothball that idea for a while. We may come back to it in a while, but some folks would say, oh, well, his first business did really well after somebody else ran it. Then his second business failed. Why the hell should I listen to this guy? Right? That terminology, right? So that mentality, I think, is what I'm looking for. So I do encourage people to go out there and try something, no matter if you got some small business, you can learn a lot from that. And maybe you can apply that to a big idea, either your own idea or somebody else's idea. And if it's technology driven, all the better, because that does give you a real edge in the marketplace. People will look at new companies that have unique technology much sooner than they'll look at new companies offering other kinds of things. And that's why I still think technology is a great place to start businesses from. I see people looking at watches. Are we out of time?
It's about 5 to 3.
5 to 3. Okay, so one more, if anybody has any. very accessible. If you want to write down my email, it's bnt5@cornell.edu, or I guess you guys have it on your piece of paper. Feel free to contact me. I like working with aspiring entrepreneurs. I can be sometimes slow to get back to people, but eventually I will get back to everybody. And you guys should also meet Andrew Skeery. He does this kind of stuff professionally as well. The group he works for, Kenza, is almost institutionalized the same philosophies that I've taken. So if nothing else, it's we endorse each other's model. So that there's a way you can institutionalize this, or you can, as I'm doing, making a career out of it. Because hopefully, when I get done with Mesmerize, we'll have another positive exit, and then we'll do it again. We'll just keep doing it until we're bored.
So you're successful.
Well, yeah. I should throw something at you, Scott. That's all I got. Thank you very much.
Thank you.